All right. We should be live and recording. Hope you guys are having a great. Today is Tuesday as I'm recording this, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So hope you guys had an amazing Thanksgiving Day, Thanksgiving week, Thanksgiving weekend. However much you celebrated last week, hope you had a great time. Been getting just a ton of really great messages from clients this week and even over the past weekend of just how this was one of the first Thanksgivings where they really enjoyed themselves, but they didn't feel like they overdid it necessarily. Like they enjoyed the sweets, the pie, this, that, but they felt more mindful in stopping and not stopping out of a sense of like shaming themselves to stop or feeling guilty and that making them stop or this kind of fear of fat gain, but stopping because genuinely they were satisfied with having, a moderate portion size of this or that and like, oh, that was enjoyable, that tasted good, I feel satisfied. Let me just move on from the food and enjoy, the rest of the time, with my family, but not needing to like stuff yourself to make the most out of Thanksgiving. And it's been really cool to get those messages from so many clients, like I said, over the past few days, because that is like the ultimate endpoint of like where we want to be when it comes to holidays, to where we can have a little bit extra food. Like I probably had more calories than what my body typically burns in a day on Thanksgiving Day. And that's okay, but not really overdoing it to the point where you feel like, oh, like, man, I feel just really uncomfortable and, or beating yourself up about it. Because if you are consistent the other days of the year, the other weeks of the year, these holidays don't really matter. I always say this, that let's say you give yourself 30 days of the year to celebrate for holidays, right? And that's maybe even on the high end. 30 days out of the year, even if you like overeat a little bit on those 30 days, that's still 90% of the year, the other 330 days of the year that you can be consistent and see a ton of progress. So you shouldn't ever be like super stressed about these Thanksgiving days or holidays, Christmas coming up, because they don't really make that big of an impact on your progress and your results. It's the days in between there, the months and weeks in between there, that's where you're not executing. That's what's, stopping you. So it was just really cool to get those messages from so many clients, this past week and this weekend. A lot of clients are and aren't even in fat loss phases right now, but they're actually hitting like new lows on the scale the past couple of days too, even after, the Thanksgiving week, which is, just really cool to see just, so many of them learning how to really like I said, just enjoy the moment, enjoy the food, stop when they're starting to feel a little bit full because they don't want to physically feel uncomfortable, and then still feeling like, hey, this was a really enjoyable Thanksgiving. So hopefully your Thanksgiving, was the same, but I know that's not necessarily the case for some people. And I know that feeling guilty and feeling shameful almost and feeling frustrated with maybe some food choices you made over the weekend or over the week is something that a lot of you, might be experiencing. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, in this video, as to just kind of talking about that whole discussion, and then also why you should never feel this way. Now, going to like the science, right? The science behind why we feel this way. We feel this way obviously because when we overeat a ton, we feel really bloated. We might even step on the scale, see it's up a few pounds, and we're like, "Oh, I gained a bunch of body fat." But science-wise, physiologically, you couldn't have gained that much body fat in one day. Even if you would have went completely overboard and let's say you ate 7,000 calories in a day, you probably gained at most a little over a pound of body fat, maybe a pound and a half, but that's at most. So if you see the weight in the scale be up by 4 pounds, 5 pounds, know that probably a good 3 pounds of that at least is just water retention, extra bloating that is going to come down. It's not actual fat gain. So physiologically, we should never feel guilty about this. And you should never feel guilty about any specific food you eat in general anyway, because one food in and of itself will never make you gain body fat. It won't make you gain body fat, especially over, a long span of time. You could have pumpkin pie every single day. And as long as you are not overeating your calories at a whole throughout the day, you will not gain body fat. You can actually even lose body fat really consistently while having pumpkin pie every single day, as long as you're accounting for your calories. There was a guy, I can't remember his name, but years ago he did this gas station diet where he ate nothing but processed food coming from a gas station, and he lost a significant amount of weight in the span of like a month or a few months, eating nothing but that. And they were all really processed foods, really high in sugar foods. Now he probably lost a little bit of muscle because he probably wasn't hitting his proper protein intake, but he still lost body fat overall. So there's no food that's going to just having any amount of it is going to just pack on the pounds and pack on the body fat. That's not how it works. Your body's going to break down that food into different components, carbs, fats, protein. It's going to then store, if there's extra calories there coming from those areas, store it as body fat. But if they're not extra calories, if we're burning those up throughout the day because we're staying within our calorie budget still, we won't gain body fat over time. It won't happen. So because of that, you should never feel guilty alone of just eating a certain food because, like I said, you can eat pumpkin pie, chocolate, sweets, this, that every day within your calorie budget and still lose body fat. Just like, when it comes to finances, you could spend money on Starbucks every single day, but as long as you're still saving enough throughout the rest of the month to increase, your wealth or whatever you want to call it, in your account month after month, year after year, then overall you're still in a net positive. So never feel guilty about a singular food because of that. Because physiologically, it's not going to just soak up a bunch of body fat necessarily. Now, will you maybe not feel as full throughout the day? Will it maybe take more calories for you to feel full if you're having that highly processed stuff all the time? Yeah, probably, which is then going to lead to you probably overeating calories a little bit, gaining some body fat over time, and this and that. But just one singular day or one singular meal, never feel guilty about that because it just doesn't matter unless you take into account the rest of the context. Now, even if let's say you do, or let's even like backtrack to this, right? Let's go over this other point. Psychology wise, why we feel guilty about certain things. Psychology wise, we feel guilty about certain things. We have that emotion, especially when it comes to like food and what we consume and everything. Not because we should actually feel guilty about it morally, but it's because of just our conditioning or the environment we're in or the situation we're in. So here are a couple of examples or analogies, right? Think about a college student. And let's say they're a junior year of college, so they're 21 years old of drinking age, right? And they go to a college party with all of their friends, and all of their friends are drinking, having a good time, this and that. They would probably feel guilty, or maybe guilt isn't the right emotion, but they would feel this kind of like uncomfortable feeling if they were the only ones not drinking and all of their other friends were and they were having a good time. They were the only sober ones at this party. They would feel like the oddball out. They would feel almost guilty, like they're not drinking enough to have enough fun like their friends are. They probably would have some kind of uncomfortable feeling or some kind of maybe slightly negative feeling there that maybe is somewhat similar to the feeling of guilt, that emotion. But take a totally different scenario and flip it to the opposite side where let's say you have somebody who they're getting together with a group of friends who are all previous alcoholics and they're maybe going to a restaurant, maybe a sports bar to get some food. Everyone's getting just waters or maybe, some Diet Cokes or Coke Zeros. Nobody's getting alcohol because they're previous alcoholics and they're trying to stay away from that. But the one friend decides to order, a drink. In that scenario, that person is kind of the oddball out. That person might feel a little bit of guilt of, man, I really want a beer, but I know all my friends are previous alcoholics. I know I shouldn't be ordering this, but I'm going to anyway. They probably feel some negative emotion there. And in both situations, it's actually the opposite decision that is making one person feel guilty and the other person feeling guilty, where the other person feels guilty for not drinking and the other person feels guilty for drinking, based on the context and the people they're around. And it could even be the same person that's experiencing this too. A 1-year-old in college with their friends at a college party might feel guilty for not drinking. And a 21-year-old with maybe, a couple of their uncles and their dad's friends who used to be alcoholics, he might feel guilty for drinking in front of them. So that right there just shows, like in that example, right? It's an example of feeling guilty in two different situations where actually the behavior you're choosing are two opposite things. Other examples of this could be maybe like the food choices you make of getting like a greasy burger versus something healthier. You might be with one group of friends or family who they tend to eat a little bit more healthy, and you maybe choose a greasy burger and you feel like the odd one out and feel like you feel bad, like, oh, I shouldn't be eating this, I shouldn't be choosing this. But then you might hang out with the other side of the family who maybe they don't have as great of eating habits and they are used to eating a lot of processed fried foods, and you feel like the oddball out, like proposing the healthier option. Two different contexts, same person, but the feeling of guilt is coming about from pretty much the opposite decision. So what I'm trying to get at with this is this feeling of guilt and feeling like, oh, this is wrong to do this. It is wrong to eat more food on Thanksgiving or the week of Thanksgiving. It all comes down to just labels that you are putting on it, and they are actually objectively good or bad, which is why like I really try to push my clients to, this is something we work through a lot within our coaching, is to really take the emotions out of food and the emotions out of how we feel about exercise and this and that. Now, sometimes there are times where emotionally we feel like drained and we don't want to do that, but that's more of like an objective feeling, like you're tired, you don't really have the energy or mental capacity to want to do it, but you still do it anyway. But these emotions like guilt is a very interesting emotion where we shouldn't have guilt around something with food. We could maybe have guilt around something like hurting somebody close to us. So maybe emotionally we hurt them. We do something that betrays them or something, for example. Or maybe we do something else to an animal accident, like you accidentally run over a squirrel on the road or something. You feel guilty about that because you could have swerved or whatever it is. Just examples. But like a living being that we cause harm to, whether intentionally or unintentionally, is a situation where guilt could maybe be a valid emotion. But when it comes to something like food, where food does not have feelings, food is a very objective thing, we should not have these types of strong emotions around them. And I think over time, like I've kind of gotten to trying to stop wording things as what does your relationship with food look like? I know that's a term that a lot of people talk about. Do you have a poor relationship with food or relationship with exercise? And I think even that terminology kind of puts too much of a humanistic element on food and too much of a um like good or bad morality label on food and exercise too, when it shouldn't be that like personal. And I think maybe a different way to view it as is your perspective or outlook on food, or your perspective or outlook on exercise, instead of your relationship with it, right? Because one is a relationship with it where there's something dynamic, and I think that's where emotions can come into play. But when you think about your perspective on something, it's more objective, and you're thinking about, like, some other thing that's not necessarily a living being that can make you feel those emotions back, if that makes sense. Kind of going down a little bit of a rabbit hole of just, I don't know, philosophy and how you view, these types of things and the psychology around it. But I think it does make a difference. But you should never feel guilty about eating food, because what do you feel guilty about? Because now you're going to maybe not lose as much weight, and now you're maybe not going to, or maybe you're going to, gain a little bit of weight back. But why is that making you feel guilty? Is it making you feel guilty because you think you're a bad person for doing that, or because you think eating more calories than what I burn in a day is morally bad? I hope not, because in some contexts, right, in some civilizations, especially previous ones, that was probably viewed as like a good thing. Like I know there were things that we learned in like history and everything going back where being a little bit overweight was actually seen as like a sign of wealth, like a good thing, and people aspired. And in some cultures, even maybe today, like especially in areas where like food is very scarce, where like there's not a lot of resources towards foods, being a little bit overweight in that context probably get you like a higher social status. Whereas in maybe our society in the US, because food is so abundant and so many people are overweight, being overweight is seen as like a negative thing. But in those contexts, whether previous history or even now in different cultures, it's seen as a good thing. So how can something be seen as such a good thing in one context and a bad thing in another if it is objectively bad to overeat? Which it's not, right? Now, if overeating causes you to then gain weight over time, and then it causes health issues, or it causes you to feel insecure and not want to do certain things in your life, go swimming with your kids and this and that, then yeah, down the road, it can lead to something negative. But overeating in itself, especially one day, is never something you should feel negative about and feel morally guilty about, if that makes sense. So we need to really like detach those emotions from how we feel and really think about this journey, this fitness journey, this weight loss journey, fat loss journey, in the most objective way as possible, almost like an equation. Okay. I have these inputs, right? I do this type of exercise consistently week to week. I eat this way consistently week to week. I walk this much consistently week to week. I sleep this much week to week. This is all those things added together. This is what the output or the result of those actions is or are. and it's me at this body composition. And now we have these other sets of inputs of maybe me eating more, maybe me not being as active, maybe me skipping workouts more often, maybe me slacking on my sleep because I'm scrolling my phone too much. All these other habits and behaviors, these other inputs. And if I do those consistently, it leads to this output, which is maybe me being overweight and not losing weight and not being able to, lose the 20 pounds or 30 pounds that I want to lose. Right. And when we say those things, it's really easy to label, okay, one outcome is good or bad, but we want to stray away from that and not think of one outcome as better or worse or good or bad, but instead one outcome is just the outcome we prefer. And the other one is the outcome we don't prefer. Like think about two people baking a cake, and one person may like their cake a little bit more fluffy, which means they need to put a little bit of more of this ingredient into there. Another person might like their cake a little bit less fluffy, so they might put a little bit less of this ingredient in here. I know my wife, another example of this. We make protein pancakes pretty often, and whenever I make them, because it just saves time, I usually make like one big pancake. But my wife, whenever she makes pancakes, she will make like 3 or 4 little ones that are maybe like 3 inches wide. That's just how she likes to do it. Both cases, they actually both taste the exact same. They're both the same pancake mix. My case, I like the bigger pancake, just takes less time for me to cook, but she prefers the smaller ones. And like the smaller pancakes or the bigger pancakes aren't necessarily better or worse. It's just a preference. And it's just what you desire, what you want. What I desire, the bigger pancake. My wife desires the smaller pancakes. And you might desire a certain body composition, which requires a certain type of inputs that you're putting into this equation. And maybe months later, you might decide you want a different body composition and you might change those inputs to get a different output. You might realize, like I've, had some clients where they've lost a significant amount of weight, maybe 20, 25, 30 pounds. And then they get to that lowest weight and they're like, okay, I love being this lean, but the inputs required to maintain that leanness feel just a little bit too hard for me to do in my everyday life. And I'm okay with gaining 5 pounds back and then maintaining from there. That way I can live a little bit more of a flexible lifestyle. So they just change those inputs and the output changes. But them gaining 5 pounds and maintaining from there is nothing they should feel guilty about because that is their change in preference that happened. And they're just changing their inputs that go along with this. So I know I'm kind of going in different directions a little bit with this, but the more objective you can be with your fitness journey and the actions you're taking, whether it's measuring the actions you're taking, looking at, your previous week of tracking your food of have I been hitting my goals or not? No, I'm a little bit high in calories. Okay, let me find a way to adjust that. Have I been a little bit low in calories? Fine, let me find a way to adjust that. Whether you're hitting your targets consistently or not, do not let it dictate your emotions and make you feel guilty and make you feel like you're a failure or a bad person for doing so. You are not a bad person for not losing weight. You are not a bad person for being inconsistent. Will you probably not reach your goals if you are consistently overeating and consistently not hitting your targets? No, you probably won't lose weight, but that does not make you a bad person. It just won't get you close to your goal. And if you really want that goal, you really want that to achieve that outcome that you say you want, then those actions do have to change. But you don't have to have these huge emotional fluctuations with everything. And this is also why I really encourage clients, even when they start to see a ton of progress and feel really good about themselves, to feel positive, but also try not to put all of your self-worth in it either. And all of your self-worth in like how much weight you've lost and where your body composition is now. Because when you do that, you almost like overcompensate these emotions positively on the high end. And then once you get to a point where you don't have any more weight to lose, but you've filled your identity so much with the weight on the scale going down and down and down, now you feel kind of lost then because now week to week, you're not seeing new low weights on the scale. You're seeing actually just a consistent trend of it basically staying the same, right? Because that's where we overall want to be. But that excitement isn't necessarily there because you placed all of your worth in a new low weight on the scale every single week. So we almost want to be careful of doing this on the opposite end of the spectrum too, of being overly positive about like how much weight we're losing too. We want to be a little bit closer to neutral with everything of, okay, like I feel good because I'm being consistent. but I know I'm not putting all of my self-worth in this. And then when we aren't executing, we want to stay neutral and not beat ourselves up about it, but just be very factual and be like, hey, if I keep going down this path and doing what I'm doing for multiple days and weeks in a row, I'm just simply not going to reach my goal. And if that goal is really important to you, then that's not going to end up being a good outcome for you, right? Because you're not achieving, what you set out to achieve. Especially these short-term emotions of feeling guilty about one meal or one day or one food or one week. We need to be able to stop that, because then you end up being on this huge roller coaster of these emotions just constantly fluctuating back and forth, where you have a few days where you're completely off the rails and feeling guilty. And then you beat yourself up mentally so much to where it forces you to actually change your behavior. And then you do quote unquote really good for a few days and you're feeling really positive, but then you have one slip up and you beat yourself up about it, and that turns into a few days of slipping up again. And you constantly are going through these huge emotional fluctuations of feeling really good and really bad. But instead, we want to feel like pretty good all the time. And that doesn't mean we can't execute really well, but even when we're executing really well, we want to realize, hey, like I'm going to not get too high, and I'm going to make sure I don't get too low when it comes to my decisions and actions. And I'm just going to approach it very objectively of, okay, these inputs are going to equal this output. And if I do that enough times over and over and over consistently, 80 plus 85% of the time, then I'm going to see results as time goes on. So hopefully this wasn't jumbled up too much as far as the points I was trying to get across, but just some thoughts I've been having after going through a bunch of client check-ins the past couple of days. So I wanted to come on here and share them with you this week. Hopefully this was helpful. If you're interested in one-on-one coaching, definitely send me a message, send me a DM. Would love to, talk more, especially as the new year approaches, because one-on-one coaching spots are going to fill up probably really quickly once we hit January and February. So make sure to secure your spot ASAP.